"You must forgive my second girl, your grace," said Mrs. Pym over the tea things. "She is simple. We do not bring her forward." The Duke of Studland set down his cup, because 2 hours earlier he had stood on the far side of a yew hedge in that woman's garden, and listened to her simple daughter read 4 pages of Cowper aloud to a deaf gardener, in a low, clear, perfectly ordered voice, with a running commentary on the poet's opinion of hares that had made a duke laugh into his own glove. "Simple," he repeated. "She stammers dreadfully in company. She was dropped as an infant." Mrs. Pym said this comfortably, as one explains a chimney that smokes. "We keep her at home. She is useful about the linen." Wulfric, 4th Duke of Studland, looked at the young woman sitting at the far end of the room with the mending basket, who had not been introduced, and who was at that moment sewing a button on her brother's coat, and pretending to be furniture with the practiced competence of a person who had been doing it for a decade. "Madam," he said, "I have come about the water meadow, but I find I have another piece of business, and I should like Miss Pym to hear it." He had ridden to Pym Hall that morning with 11 weeks left, and no notion at all of how he meant to spend them. The terms of his grandfather's will were the joke of the county and the disaster of his life. Studland, the house, the park, the 9 villages, the collieries at Marrowbank came to him absolutely on one condition, that he be married before his 40th birthday. Unmarried on that day, and the whole of it went over to his cousin, Mr. Selby Barrow, who had already been heard in a London club describing what he intended to do with the villages, which was to clear them and put sheep on the land. 1,400 people. Wulfric had counted them himself, off the rate books, one wet evening in November, and had then sat with the list in front of him for some hours. He had been offered every daughter in 3 counties. That was the part nobody believed. He could have married any one of 11 young women by Michaelmas, and each of them came with a mother who had read the will in the newspapers, and every proposal he framed in his own head sounded the same when he tried it aloud. "I require a wife by Lady Day, and you require a duke, and let us not pretend that either of us has been consulted." He could not do it. He had watched his own father and mother do it for 22 years, and there had been a great deal of gilding in that house, and no kindness in it whatsoever. And then, behind a yew hedge, a woman with a book had said, in the voice of somebody explaining a friend, that Cowper had understood hares better than he had ever understood men. "Miss Pym," said the Duke of Studland, into the silence of Mrs. Pym's drawing-room, "will you walk out with me on the gravel where your mother may see us from that window?" She came. She did not look at her mother, and she did not look at him, and on the gravel she stopped at a distance that was scrupulously correct and folded her hands. "Why, your Grace W. will be disappointed," she said. "It is worse when I am one looked at. Then I shall look at the fountain." He turned to the fountain and put his hands behind his back. "I heard you read to your gardener this morning. It was the best hour I have spent this year, and I am ashamed of having stolen it. Do you know the terms of my grandfather's will?" "Everybody in the sea county knows them." "Then you know I have 11 weeks, and you know what my cousin means to do at Marrowbank." He kept his eyes on the water. "I am going to make you an offer of marriage, Miss Pym, and I am going to be honest about it, which will make it sound worse than the dishonest offers you may have heard of. It is a contract. I need a wife by the 25th of March. You need to be out of a house where your mother tells strangers you were dropped as an infant. I have had the terms drawn." He heard her breathe. "I am simple," she said. "You have been told." "You are stammering in the open air with a duke on your mother's gravel, which I imagine would loosen anybody's tongue in the wrong direction," said Wulfric. "Miss Pym, I have 3,000 acres and 1,400 tenants and a cousin who counts in sheep. I have not the time to be delicate, and I have not the smallest intention of being false. I am not offering you love. I am offering you a settlement, a house, a name, and the whole of my protection in exchange for 11 weeks of your courage." There was a long pause on the gravel. "I should like to read it," she said. He had the contract sent over the next morning, sealed, 4 pages of it, and he expected either a refusal or an acceptance by the afternoon post. What he got 3 days later was a summons. The Pym drawing room had been arranged like a court. Mrs. Pym sat in the center with her eldest daughter beside her and her son standing at the mantel. The family attorney had been fetched from marriage, and there, on the table, lay the 4 pages of the marriage articles of the Duke of Studland, and there was ink all over them. "Your Grace, I must apologize," Mrs. Pym began. "She has scribbled upon it. She does not understand." "Mamma," said Eulalia Pym, "sit down." She did not stammer once. Wulfric noticed that first and understood only later why. She was not being looked at as a curiosity. She was working. "Your Grace." She turned the pages round to face him and put her finger on the first. "Clause 4. My mother is to have £500. I have struck it out. She is to have 200, and my father's debts to the corn merchant are to be paid instead, because they are my father's and he is dead, and it is not right that they stand against his name. Clause 7. I am to appear in London for the season each year. I have struck it out. I will not be exhibited. I will hold your table at Studland, and your tenants' school, and your accounts if you will let me near them. But I will not be walked into Almack's to be looked at while I try to say the word Studland." "Eulalia," said her mother. "Clause 9 says the marriage may be dissolved at your instance if I prove unequal to the station. I have struck the whole of it out and written this instead." She turned the page. "That if either of us should wish, in 10 years, that it had never been made, we shall say so to each other's face, in the same room, and not through attorneys. And I have added a clause 12, which is not in your interest at all, and which is the only one I care for." Wulfric read it. Her hand was small and even, and there was not a blot in it. "That no cottage at Marrow Bank, or in any of the 9 villages, shall be pulled down, nor any tenant put off his holding during my life or his Grace's, whatever the price of wool. And that this clause shall be recited in the marriage settlement and in his Grace's will, and that I shall have the right to enforce it in my own name." The room was entirely silent. The attorney from marriage was staring at the young woman as though a piece of the furniture had begun to give evidence. "Miss Pym," said the Duke of Studland, and his voice was not quite level, "have you a pen?" They were married on the 4th of March, 3 weeks inside the will, in the church at Studland, with the snow still lying in the churchyard. She stammered over the responses. She stammered badly 3 times, and the church heard every syllable of it, and Wulfric stood at the rail and did the only useful thing available to a man in that position, which was to wait, without so much as shifting his weight, for as long as it took, with his eyes on her face, so that every soul in the building understood that the Duke of Studland was in no hurry whatsoever. Afterwards in the vestry she said, "I am sorry." "For what?" "For the 3rd one. It was a long one." "Madam," said Wulfric, "you have just given me 9 villages, a house I like, and 1,400 people who will not be put on the road, and you are apologizing for a consonant." The first months were a business partnership, and he was careful about it, because he had promised no love, and he had a great dislike of men who promised one thing, and then made a woman grateful for another. She took the household. She took the tenants' school. In April, without being asked, she took the estate books away into the little south room and came back in 9 days with 11 pages of notes, and the information that his agent at Marrow Bank had been charging the colliers 2 shillings the sack for coal cut out of the Duke's own ground, and putting 14 pence of it in his pocket, and that this had been going on for 6 years, and here were the tallies. "You are certain," said Wulfric, who had never in his life been able to keep a column straight in his head. "I am certain." She was certain. The agent went, the colliers had their coal at cost, and the Duke of Studland began to notice that he had taken to walking down to the little south room in the middle of the morning, for no reason he could defend. She did not stammer when they were alone. That was the thing that undid him slowly over a spring and a summer. She read to him in the evenings because he had confessed that his eyes tired, and because she had guessed the truth, which was that he had never been able to read easily in his life and had been beaten for it at school by a man who called him idle. She never once said the word simple to him, and she never had to. Selby Barrow petitioned in November. The paper came from a London firm, and Wulfric read it twice in his own hall before he understood the shape of it. His cousin did not dispute the date of the marriage. He disputed the bride. He alleged that the Duchess of Studland was, in the language of the pleading, an idiot from her birth, incapable of contract or consent, that the county had known it these 20 years, that her own mother had said so in company on more occasions than could be counted, that the marriage was therefore void, that the condition of the will had not been satisfied, and that Studland, the 9 villages and Marrow Bank passed to Selby Barrow. He had 11 affidavits. 4 of them were from people who had dined at Pym Hall. 1 of them was from Mrs. Pym. Wulfric stood in his hall with the paper in his hand and knew, with absolute clarity, 2 things. The first was that he could probably defeat it in the ordinary way. A bishop, 2 physicians, a great deal of money, and 18 months of keeping his wife entirely out of sight, while wigged men described her to a court. The second was that if he did that, he would have proved his cousin right in the only place it mattered. He found her in the south room with the coal tallies. "Read it," he said, "all of it, and then tell me what you want, and that is what we shall do." She read it, sitting very straight, taking a long time over the affidavit that had her mother's signature on it. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, which he had not expected. "I want to be heard," she said, "not defended, heard in the R-room by whoever it is that decides. They will make you speak in front of 30 men. I know what they will make me do." Her chin came up. "Wulfric, every person in that pleading believes that the noise I make settles the question. If a physician goes and swears for me and I am kept upstairs, then it will be true forever, and I shall be a woman who was got past the law. I would rather lose the whole of Studland." "You would lose the villages." "Then I shall have to be very clear," said the Duchess of Studland. The commission sat in February, in a panelled room in Chancery Lane, and it took 4 hours. She would not be coached. She had refused, flatly, to learn a single sentence by heart. She sat with her hands folded and answered every question that was put to her, and the stammer came and went like weather. It was worst at the start, and it was very bad when the commissioner's clerk shifted in his chair and sighed, and she stopped, and waited, and looked at the clerk until he was still, and then began again. She was asked to explain the will. She explained it better than the attorney had. She was asked whether she understood the nature of a contract, and she asked leave to be handed the marriage articles, and then took the commissioners through her own 4 amendments, clause by clause, including the one they had all read in the newspapers, and gave her reasons for each. She was asked, by a hard old gentleman at the end of the table, why her own mother had sworn that she was an idiot. The room went quiet. Wulfric, sitting behind her, put his hands flat on his knees and did not move, because she had made him promise in the carriage that he would not stand up. "Because she believed it, sir," said Eulalia. She believed it when I was 4, when I could not get my words out, and she said it so often and so early that she has never once since had to look at me and find out whether it was true. I do not think she is wicked. I think she is a woman who settled a question a long time ago and has been comfortable ever since. A pause. You are asking me if my mind is sound. I cannot show you my mind, sir. I can only tell you that I have kept the books of 9 villages for a 12-month, that I found 14 pence in a shilling that 11 men had missed, and that everything I have ever been prevented from doing, I was prevented from by the sound of my voice, and not by the sense of it. That is all the evidence there is, and I have brought all of it with me. The commission reported in 9 days. The petition was dismissed with costs, and the report contained one sentence which was quoted in 3 newspapers and framed, later, in the little south room at Studland. That the court found her grace to be a person of unusual clearness of understanding, whose impediment of speech had been mistaken for want of intellect by persons who had not troubled to listen. Selby Barrow went abroad. Mrs. Pym wrote a long letter, and received £200 a year and no invitation, which her daughter arranged herself and never afterwards discussed. They came home to Studland in March, on the anniversary of the contract, and Wulfric took her into the library and laid the 4 inked pages on the table in front of her, and asked her, formally, whether she wished, in the terms of her own Clause 9, to say anything to his face in the same room. "Yes," said Eulalia. "Then say it." "You could have won it with physicians," she said. "You let me go to London and be asked whether I was an idiot in front of 30 men, because I asked you to, and you sat behind me for 4 hours and did not stand up, and it must have half killed you." "It did." "That is why I love you," she said. "Not the settlement, not the house, that." Wulfric, 4th Duke of Studland, who had had 11 weeks and a will and no notion how to spend either, took his wife's inky hands and put them against his chest. "The contract is discharged," he said. "Every clause of it but the 12th, which stands in my will and shall stand in my son's. You may have the whole of Studland on my word and nothing else, and if that is not enough security, madam, I shall have it drawn up in 4 pages and let you correct it." They read together in the evenings for 31 years in the south room, with the tallies on the table. Guests at Studland were sometimes surprised to be shown a framed page of a court report in a house with 2 Titians in it. "My wife's character," the Duke would say, in the words of people who had to be dragged to it. And then he would wait, without shifting his weight, for as long as it took, while she told them the rest of it herself.